Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment launched to a Metacritic score of 78 and mostly positive reviews, but beneath those numbers lies a deeply divided audience. Some critics call it a stunning slice of action and the best Hyrule Warriors yet. Others condemn it as insanely repetitive, horribly shallow, and pointlessly easy, the absolute least interesting thing to do with Zelda on the Switch 2. One game, two completely opposite reactions. This isn't a universally hated game, but it is polarizing in ways that reveal fundamental tensions in modern gaming. What happens when you take a beloved franchise and transform it into something entirely different? When you promise to tell essential lore but deliver generic action? When you charge full price for a spin-off that reuses content and doesn't match its mainline counterpart? Today, we're breaking down why Age of Imprisonment has become such a divisive title, exploring the disconnect between expectations and reality, and understanding why even positive reviews carry significant caveats. This is about more than one game. It's about the risks of genre transplants and the cost of failing to meet player expectations. The genre mismatch problem. The fundamental issue with Age of Imprisonment isn't that it's bad at what it does, it's that what it does isn't what many Zelda fans want. This is a Musou game, the hack-and-slash genre pioneered by Dynasty Warriors where you fight thousands of mindless enemies in repetitive battles. It's button-mashing action, not exploration and puzzle-solving. For fans who fell in love with Tears of the Kingdom's creativity and freedom, Age of Imprisonment feels like a betrayal of everything that made Zelda special. Here's the core problem. Zelda is about discovery, ingenuity, and thoughtful progression. Musou games are about spectacle, power fantasy, and repetition. These philosophies are fundamentally incompatible. When you take Zelda's world and characters and force them into the Musou template, you're stripping away what makes Zelda beloved and replacing it with something much shallower. Reviews consistently note this disconnect. Players expecting a Zelda experience are disappointed to find they're just mashing buttons and watching numbers go up. The exploration that defines Zelda? Absent. The clever puzzles? Gone. The sense of discovery and wonder? Replaced with objective markers and mission checklists. You're not exploring Hyrule, you're conquering battlefields. The criticism becomes even sharper when you consider the source material. Tears of the Kingdom emphasized player creativity, building vehicles, solving problems in multiple ways, approaching challenges from any angle. Age of Imprisonment takes those creative tools and reduces them to combat gimmicks. The Zonai devices that let you build anything in TOTK become simplified attack options in this game. That's not adaptation, that's reduction. For Musou fans, this might not matter. They understand the genre's limitations and appreciate the combat depth. But for Zelda fans who don't care about Musou conventions, Age of Imprisonment feels like a hollow imitation of something they love, trading depth for spectacle and meaningful gameplay for mindless action. The not actually a prequel disappointment. Nintendo marketed Age of Imprisonment as canon, a genuine expansion of Tears of the Kingdom's lore that would finally reveal what happened during the Imprisoning War. This was a huge deal. TOTK's backstory was deliberately vague, showing fragments of Hyrule's founding and Ganondorf's rise without filling in the details. Age of Imprisonment promised to complete that story, to show us what really happened when Zelda was trapped in the past. Except it doesn't really do that. The game adds characters who never appeared in TOTK, creates subplots that feel disconnected from the main narrative, and glosses over the very events it promised to explore. Multiple reviews criticize the story as shallow, lacking urgency, and failing to provide the revelations fans expected. The major story beats are things we already knew from TOTK. The game doesn't enhance our understanding, it just retells the same events with less impact. This is devastating for the game's appeal. The entire value proposition was see the untold story of the Imprisoning War. If the story doesn't actually tell that tale in a meaningful way, what's the point? Players wanted deep character development for Rauru and Sanya, emotional weight to Zelda's isolation in the past, and genuine insight into how Hyrule fell. Instead, they got dry cutscenes discussing battle tactics and filler characters taking screen time from the people we actually care about. The canonical nature of the game makes this worse. If Age of Imprisonment were another alternate timeline story like Age of Calamity, players could dismiss weak narrative elements as non-canon side content. But Nintendo explicitly stated this game is canon. These events really happened in Zelda's timeline. That means the shallow characterization and glossed over events aren't just disappointing, they're the official version of events. This is what actually occurred during one of Hyrule's most important historical periods, and it's underwhelming. Fans feel cheated. They were promised essential lore and got a story that barely adds anything meaningful to what TOTK already established. The game creates new characters instead of developing established ones, wastes time on generic war scenes instead of exploring emotional character moments, and ultimately feels like it's checking boxes rather than genuinely expanding the universe. The repetitive problem. Even positive reviews acknowledge that Age of Imprisonment is extremely repetitive. You fight hordes of enemies, capture objectives, defeat bosses, and repeat that loop for 20+ hours. Mission structures rarely deviate. Maps feel bland and reused. Combat encounters blur together into an endless stream of button presses and special attacks. For Musou veterans, this is expected. It's the genre's nature. But for everyone else, this repetition becomes exhausting. Reviewers explicitly note that the game forces you to replay the same sorts of missions over and over again, and that battlefield and mission designs become dull. Even the game's defenders admit maps are a bit bland, and mission variety is lacking. This repetition wouldn't be as problematic if the moment-to-moment gameplay offered enough depth to sustain interest. But Age of Imprisoment's combat, while improved over previous Hyrule Warriors games, remains relatively shallow. You unlock combos and abilities, but fundamentally you're still doing the same actions thousands of times. The game attempts to add variety through character switching and special mechanics, but it's never enough to overcome the core sameness of Musou gameplay.
The pacing makes this worse. Early in the game, combat feels satisfying because you're learning new systems and unlocking abilities. But as you progress, the novelty wears off, and you realize you're going to be doing essentially the same thing for another 15 hours. The game's length works against it. If Age of Imprisonment were a tight 10-hour experience, the repetition might be tolerable. At 20+ hours, it becomes a grind. Compare this to mainline Zelda games, which constantly introduce new mechanics, environments, and challenges. TOTK never let you settle into routine. There was always something new to discover, a different approach to try, an unexpected surprise. Age of Imprisonment offers none of that variety. Once you've played the first few hours, you've essentially seen everything the game has to offer mechanically. The price and value question. Age of Imprisonment launched at $70, the same price as Tears of the Kingdom itself. Let's be clear, this is a spin-off Musou game being sold at premium mainline Zelda pricing. For many players, this feels absurd. Why should a derivative genre game cost the same as one of the most acclaimed titles in Nintendo's history? The value proposition simply doesn't hold up. Tears of the Kingdom offered 50+ hours of varied gameplay, revolutionary mechanics, an expansive world filled with secrets and genuine innovation. Age of Imprisonment offers 20 hours of repetitive combat, shallow story content, and reused assets from TOTK. These are not equivalent experiences, yet they demand equivalent payment. This pricing decision alienates casual fans who might have tried Age of Imprisonment at $40 or $50, but balk at $70 for a spin-off. It sets expectations that the game struggles to meet. At $70, players expect mainline quality, not a decent but flawed side project. Every weakness becomes more glaring when you've paid premium price for it. The lack of post-launch content or DLC plans compounds this issue. At least live service games justify ongoing costs with continuous content. Age of Imprisonment offers nothing beyond the base game. Once you've completed the campaign and optional missions, that's it. You paid $70 for a finite, repetitive experience with limited replayability. For many players, that's simply not acceptable value. Nintendo likely priced the game this way because they could. Zelda's brand power and switch to launch window positioning meant people would pay regardless. But just because players will pay doesn't mean they'll feel good about it. The pricing decision creates resentment that colors perception of the entire game. The identity crisis. Age of Imprisonment can't decide what it wants to be, and this identity confusion undermines both aspects of its hybrid nature. It's trying to be a Zelda game and a Musou game simultaneously, but it compromises both to the point where neither group is fully satisfied. For Zelda fans, it's not Zelda enough. The exploration is minimal, the puzzles are absent, the sense of adventure is replaced by linear mission structure. You're in Hyrule, fighting Zelda enemies with Zelda characters, but it doesn't feel like a Zelda experience. It's Zelda-themed content, not a Zelda game. That distinction matters enormously to fans who love the series for specific design philosophies that Musou gameplay inherently contradicts. For Musou fans, it's constrained by Zelda's setting and tone. Pure Musou games embrace absurdity and let you become an unstoppable force of nature. Age of Imprisonment moderates this power fantasy to fit Zelda's more grounded aesthetic. The result is a Musou game that feels neutered, lacking the over-the-top spectacle that defines the genre's appeal. You're simultaneously too powerful for Zelda's design philosophy, but not powerful enough for Musou's power fantasy. The game also can't decide whether story or gameplay is its priority. It claims the story is essential canon, but then under-delivers narratively because Musou structure doesn't allow for proper character development or pacing. It promises meaningful gameplay depth, but then interrupts combat constantly with story cutscenes and dialogue. Neither element gets the space it needs to succeed. This identity crisis manifests in bizarre design decisions. The game includes TOTC's building mechanics, but strips away the freedom that made them meaningful. It features exploration elements, but locks them behind linear mission progression. It wants to tell an intimate character story, but structures everything around large-scale warfare. Every compromise makes both aspects weaker. Games that succeed at genre fusion find ways to let both elements enhance each other. Age of Imprisonment's elements actively conflict, creating a muddled experience that satisfies no one completely. Zelda fans wish it were more Zelda, Musou fans wish it were more Musou, everyone wishes it had committed more fully to either direction instead of awkwardly straddling the middle. The performance paradox. Here's something ironic. Age of Imprisonment runs great on Switch 2. Reviews consistently praise its performance. 60 frames per second in docked mode, smooth frame rates even with hundreds of enemies on screen, fast loading times. By technical standards, this is the best performing Hyrule Warriors game ever made. But technical performance doesn't solve fundamental design problems. The game runs well, but that doesn't make the missions less repetitive. Graphics are sharp, but that doesn't make the maps more interesting. Stable frame rates are great, but they don't compensate for shallow gameplay. Nintendo and Koei Tecmo solved the technical issues that plagued Age of Calamity, yet somehow the game feels less compelling despite these improvements. This creates a strange situation where reviewers praise the performance while criticizing almost everything else. It runs perfectly, they say, before spending paragraphs explaining why the actual game being performed smoothly isn't very good. Perfect technical execution of a flawed concept is still flawed, no matter how polished the execution. The Switch 2 exclusivity makes this worse. The game demands new hardware to run properly, but it doesn't justify that hardware requirement with revolutionary gameplay or stunning visual achievements. It's well optimized for Switch 2, sure, but so what? The game underneath that optimization is still repetitive and shallow. Players who buy Switch 2 specifically for Age of Imprisonment may find themselves with capable hardware running a game that doesn't leverage that capability in interesting ways.
The comparison problem. Age of Imprisonment exists in the shadow of Tears of the Kingdom, and that comparison is devastating. TOTK was a landmark achievement, a game that pushed boundaries, revolutionized open-world design, and redefined what Zelda could be. Age of Imprisonment uses TOTK's world, characters, and mechanics, but delivers none of its magic. Every element feels like a downgrade. The building mechanics that were revolutionary in TOTK become simplistic attack options. The exploration that defined TOTK becomes linear mission progression. The creativity that made TOTK special becomes constrained combat applications. Side by side, the comparison is brutal. Age of Imprisonment is Tears of the Kingdom stripped of everything that made it great. This matters because players are making that comparison constantly. They're playing Age of Imprisonment and thinking, in TOTK, I could do this better. They're fighting in familiar locations, remembering how much more interesting those places were in the mainline game. They're watching cutscenes and wishing they were playing the actual story instead of this side narrative. The proximity makes it worse. Age of Imprisonment launched less than 2 years after TOTK. The memories are fresh. Players haven't forgotten how good TOTK felt, and now they're experiencing a lesser version of the same content. If Age of Imprisonment had launched 5 years from now, perhaps the comparison would sting less. But it launched while TOTK was still an active conversation, still being played, still fresh in cultural memory. Age of Calamity didn't face this problem as severely because Breath of the Wild had been out for 3 years and offered different enough content. Age of Imprisonment directly reuses TOTK's setting, story period, and mechanics. The comparison is unavoidable and unflattering. The for fans only limitation. Multiple reviews conclude with the same caveat. If you're a fan of Musou games, you'll enjoy this. If you're not, skip it. This caveat is damning because it acknowledges the game has limited appeal. It's not trying to convert anyone or expand the audience. It's servicing existing Musou fans with Zelda-themed content. For a $70 game launching as a Switch 2 exclusive, that limited appeal is a problem. Nintendo needs games that sell systems and attract broad audiences. Age of Imprisonment only appeals to the intersection of Zelda fans and Musou enthusiasts, a niche within a niche. Everyone else is explicitly told this isn't for you. This limitation shows in the game's sales expectations and marketing. Nintendo isn't positioning this as a system-selling killer app. It's positioned as content for dedicated fans, a supplement to the main games rather than a tentpole release. That positioning protects Nintendo from unrealistic expectations, but also means the game will never achieve cultural phenomenon status or drive meaningful hardware adoption. The game's canonical status makes this especially frustrating. Essential story content is locked behind a genre that explicitly isn't for everyone. If you want to understand what happened during the Imprisoning War, you must play a Musou game even if you hate Musou gameplay. That's poor design from a franchise accessibility standpoint. The Switch 2 launch window curse. Age of Imprisonment launched early in the Switch 2's life cycle, which should have been an advantage. New hardware needs software, and a Zelda spin-off should help fill that gap. But launching early means the game is also competing with very few alternatives. Players scrutinize it more intensely because there's less else to play. The timing also means Age of Imprisonment becomes a test case for Switch 2's capabilities. Instead of being one game among many, it's a showcase title, whether Nintendo intended that or not. The technical performance is praised, but the gameplay weaknesses become more prominent. Players think, I bought new hardware for this, even though Nintendo never positioned it as a killer app. The launch window also attracts reviewers and players who wouldn't normally cover Musou games. Reviewers reviewing it because it's a major Switch 2 release, not because they enjoy the genre. This inflates negative coverage from people predisposed to dislike Musou gameplay, while dismissing those criticisms as genre bias. The result is a muddled critical reception that either validates the game's quality nor clearly identifies its audience. The final verdict. Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment isn't universally hated. It has plenty of defenders who genuinely enjoy the combat and appreciate the fan service. But it's deeply divisive because it fails to satisfy the core audience it targets while alienating everyone else. For Zelda fans, it's too shallow and repetitive to justify the Zelda branding. For Musou fans, it's constrained by Zelda's design philosophy. For everyone else, it's a $70 spin-off that demands too much money for too little innovation. The game occupies an awkward middle ground where it compromises everything to please everyone and ends up fully pleasing no one. The criticisms are legitimate. The gameplay is genuinely repetitive. The story really does underdeliver on its promises. The price point feels unjustified, and the genre mismatch is a fundamental problem. These aren't matters of taste, they're design issues that limit the game's appeal and effectiveness. Age of Imprisonment reveals the risks of genre transplants and licensed adaptations. Taking a beloved franchise and forcing it into an incompatible genre structure creates something that satisfies neither franchise fans nor genre enthusiasts. The Zelda elements don't make it a better Musou game. The Musou structure doesn't make it a better Zelda game. It's a hybrid that inherits the weaknesses of both parents while failing to capture either strengths. For some players, particularly dedicated Musou fans who love Zelda, Age of Imprisonment is exactly what they wanted. But for the broader audience, it's a divisive, flawed experience that promises more than it delivers and costs more than it's worth.
That's not hatred, but it's certainly not love. It's the complicated, frustrated reaction of an audience that expected better and received merely adequate, which, at $70 for a Zelda spin-off, feels like a disappointment.